are standing right here. This is the main dwelling, and we're standing basically just off to the side of the main dwelling. This area in the gray is the area that was that is protected as open space. The acquisition was a $4 million acquisition by the township. $1.5 million came from the Morris County Open Space Committee as a grant to the township, and $500,000 came from the township's open space trust, which is paid for through the open space tax. Because of the use of those funds, we have made an agreement that any of the area which is here shaded, which is essentially the shell around the property on three borders, Ballantyne, Cold Hill, Shelton, is protected open space, and just like the other areas of protected open space in the township, cannot be built upon, will have to remain in its existing condition. The area that is exempted from that, which is essentially the area you're standing in, the houses, the barn, that area is not restricted from having changes made to it, but clearly, as you can see from being here now, these properties all have a historic bearing on the property and really add to the feel of the property. And the township, as it goes through a community process to determine how this property is going to be utilized in the future, will have to talk seriously about how to handle these buildings, and not only from a maintenance standpoint, but also from an adaptive reuse standpoint. The property as a whole is 12 acres. At one point, the farm, when it was in its heyday, stretched all the way to 510 County Route 24, went up Mountain Avenue, going into to the northern part of Mountain Avenue, and then all the way down, going to the east to Cherry Lane and Main Street. Basically, the area that's in front of the elementary school, the pond, at one point was part of this property, so it gives you an idea of how wide and large the property was as a farm.
Our property was in it.
The property, and you're going to hear a little bit more from Eric about the property's history and how it was used. Let's see, the only other thing I just want to mention is, as you walk, just note the stakes that have the pink ribbons on it. That is, we're right now standing, as I said, right here. So as you're looking down, you're seeing the stake line here that goes to that fence, which is the property line. And you'll see as we walk this way, there's stakes here, 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 and along here, kind of signifying the boundary between the open space, just to kind of give you a physical idea of where the open space is vis-a-vis the property. The only other thing I will mention is, under the arrangement with the acquisition agreement, the family presently still, Mrs. Pitney still lives here, and the arrangement we have with the family is that she has the ability to live here until, thank you, until the township has established a maintenance program for how we're going to manage the property. She is going to continue to live here, and the agreement is that she is allowed to keep the folks that the family has been using to maintain the property, and they are paying for all the costs and the maintenance of the gardens, the buildings, and the associated structures during this transition period. And our goal is hopefully to make that transition period work so that at no point does the property end up vacant, that either there's somebody here working on behalf of the township or the family to allow for a smooth transition, and the upkeep of the buildings to, at the very least, stay equal to the way they are now, and hopefully even greater improvements to the gardens and other things. So I'm just going to put this down, and we're going to walk.
Ultimately, the driveway as it exists then won't be the access to the property.
No decisions have been made on anything as far as public access. So the likelihood is yes.
It's in the preserved area.
Yeah, but we have, I should mention, we have a right for access way with the county should access way change. That's the one area we do have an exemption on, that if we were to change the access way, the county would allow that change. But everything else, as far as physical building structures, you would not be able to construct anything in that area.
Could you quickly define what those other buildings are on the?
Sure, and we're going to actually see some of them, but I will. This is the main dwelling, and Eric's going to talk to you a little bit about that. This here is the barn that you're seeing just over
The main dwelling from its shape has been built in various stages.
Yes, and Eric will talk about that history. The existing building, and you can, if you get a chance afterwards, please go inside. You'll see an 1860 photo that really shows the building in its main core, which was essentially lop off this, and just, if you can picture, just this part of the structure, and even this was not. This was a 1930s edition. So really, it was just this area right here where my finger is. All of this here, that you're seeing over my shoulder, was add-on. The family grew in size. Eric is Mrs. Pitney's son, and Mr. Pitney is his stepfather. When they married, they brought together two very large families of, I think it was 5 boys, 5 girls. So a lot of the addition was functional addition, just to accommodate that kind of growth of the family over the years, but it is definitely not historic this is the really historic part of the structure. Back behind, there's some additional barns and sheds. This house here was a carriage house. It is presently lived in, again, by people who are helping Mrs. Pitney either on the grounds or with her physical needs, nurse, etc. And then there's several other smaller outbuildings that, again, were in the past and continue to be buildings in which help on the farm have been allowed to live in return for the help that they provide on the farm. So you'll get a chance as we walk around to see those. Unfortunately today we're not going to get into the house other than the area that you basically on this side of the house that Eric has kindly set up kind of a display of different things in. At some future point we hope to do maybe a house tour, but right now Mrs. Pitney is recovering from a broken foot, so out of respect for her we're kind of keeping out of the house per se. Let's kind of move here. I don't see Eric.
Why did they decide to sell after being here hundreds of years?
Basically, that they were at the end of typical of a long lineage of a family that they were down to basically just Mrs. Pitney living here. The other members of the family had established roots in other parts of the state or the country and had no real desire to come back and continue to run the property in any manner. Plus the upkeep of a property like this, as you can imagine, is quite ambitious. And so really it was a decision I think they came to. The family approached the town. The initial approach to the town on first blush was really didn't see the connection to open space, which is our primary focus has been on acquisition. But after touring the property like you're about to do and looking at our other future needs, it became a match, and we were able to work out an arrangement that we felt comfortable with. Let's move ahead. I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Slatland here, who's going to give you a little bit of a kind of a historic perspective on the house and the family, and then we'll go and take a look at the garden. Slides over this way.
Hit his head and just. Oh, yeah? Yeah, no, that was my stepfather always used to refer to Jim as his favorite relative.
Well, Eric's talking just as a background. Again, Eric Slatland is Mrs. Pitney's son, Kathleen Pitney. She's the last member of the Pitney family still living on the property, and Eric has graciously agreed today to really not only give us the access to the house, but to give us a little bit of his knowledge of the property. He moved here when he was 8, I think, and so this is a first-hand account as well as a lot of anecdotal information handed down through the family. So we'll turn it over to Eric and let him carry from there.
I'm by no means a historian. I've kind of been perfecting my spiel as I guess this is the 3rd or 4th one I've done. But just a little history on the family came from Ireland via England, and the name was actually O'Pitney. And in 1722. 1740, we're not really sure, James Pitney acquired the property and built the original part of the house, which is, if you were to walk over here, is basically you see this lower roof portion here. That was the dining room is beneath it. It's the oldest part of the house. The family, several generations, reading the history of the family, they went from prosperity to destitution, and sort of it's interesting to follow because it's 11 generations of direct descendants that have lived here to today. My stepfather Duncan Pitney was the last. My mom was married to, died 3 years ago. But at one point they basically held onto the property by running a still that was back in the woods off of Mountain Avenue. And then my stepfather's side of the family basically bought out the rest of the family back when Pitney married Ballantyne and had a son, Peter Ballantyne, who started the brewery in Newark. So that's sort of where their family's substantial prosperity came from. And the family lived in Morristown on Madison Avenue. There are actually photographs of that house up until about the 20s. J.O.H. Pitney, who was the founder of the law firm, which was Pitney Harden, and is now Day Pitney, is in Florham Park, still local, moved the family out here in the 20s, and that's when the rest of the house in the back there, as you see as you go around the house, was added. That cottage was added there. The driveway was changed from coming in here off of Cold Hill, and you can see there's actually a painting that was done by an artist in 1860s of the farm, where you can see the driveway coming in from there. But he moved the driveway out straight out to 24, which was a beautiful quarter-mile tree-lined driveway, but was sort of impractical in terms of the dairy operations and getting the milk out in the wintertime. But the farm at one point was 750 acres, and mostly was dairy operations and chickens, and they grew peaches here that were apparently renowned for being some of the best peaches in the country. There was a stop on the Rockabye Railroad. In fact, the old Patriots Path, if you walk that was, I guess, it went from, I think, Hunterdon County and Oldwick, that area, into Morristown. The Pitney family is, I'm not a blood relative. I moved here when I was 9 years old when my mother married Duncan. A family, fairly prominent. Dr. Jonathan Pitney is credited with founding Atlantic City by bringing the railroad from Philadelphia to Absecon. As a doctor, he thought that the Atlantic City by the sea would have great sort of therapeutic and rejuvenating value for people recovering from illnesses. I don't know that he ultimately envisioned the Atlantic City that we all know today, which is another type of therapy. But at any rate, I mentioned the Ballantynes. There was a Watkins who, if you go into the house in this window, not this first one here, but the second window, was it's carved into the glass, his memorializing his being wounded in one of the battles during the Civil War and the date in which he was wounded. Mahlon Pitney was both a state Supreme Court and U.S. Supreme Court justice, and there's some interesting correspondence in the house between him and Calvin Coolidge and William Howard Taft, who visited the family in the Morristown house. So one of the kids that was here asked if there was any interesting stories. As growing up here as a kid, there were stories that in the basement, and I never had the courage, I think, to knock the portion of the wall down, but there was apparently a tunnel that went out to Cold Hill Road, somewhere by where the greenhouse is, that was a tunnel that was part of the Freedom Railroad. There was a room that I did break into as a kid that hadn't been opened in I don't know how many years. That when I got into it, had a bottle of wine from President Buchanan's wine cellar in the White House that had been brought to Pitneys. Unfortunately, it was standing straight up, and the cork had rotted out, so it wasn't consumable, but it was interesting. The gardens, which there's a video that I've got playing that's unfortunately an old VHS that shows the farm in bloom, which is really quite spectacular. And unfortunately, you're not really seeing it at its best this time of year, but the gardens are registered with the Smithsonian. I don't know. I guess if there are any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them if I can. I don't know. We had a wonderful right here, actually, and it was an old Dutch elm that we had to take down because it finally died. But that tree's been, in fact, that's magnificent. In the spring, there's azaleas, vines from, not azaleas. What are those? Wisteria. Thank you. Wisteria, and the smell is just absolutely magnificent.
Yeah, we'll see. It's right going up the tree.
Like everything around here, it requires constant attention. That tree's lasted a lot longer. These trees were actually, you can see them as saplings in some of the photographs.
Eric, what did they use the bell for?
The bell was to ring the farmhands in for lunch and yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to go to the gardens next, but please, like Eric said, after we're done, because I know a number of you just came and got right into the tour, come back inside here. There's a number of very interesting exhibits and pictures, and like Eric said, the video of the garden on a spring day, so you get a sense of what it looks like in bloom. But a lot of very interesting artifacts related to the property, which I encourage you to come back and see. Thank you, Eric. We're going to move over here to the garden.
Thank you.
Come on, buddy.
As we're walking, you'll note, again, those stakes.
Yeah, there is those trees around.
Walk yourself to the car. Hesitating. June Chopatini is going to join us. She's going to do the garden. She just caught my eye. Just while we're waiting for June, this house over here was actually, as the property in its more modern era became a functional house or this property became a functional place for a large family to live in. This was known as the boys' house, where the boys from the family lived and the girls were in the main house. And Eric has said a couple of times how frustrated he was because he was the youngest. He wasn't allowed to live with the boys until he was much older. This is June Chopatini. June is a member of the Garden Club and has agreed to take this part of the tour on, and she's going to walk us through the gardens and give you a little more information on how they relate to the property's history.
Did you all get to go in and see the painting from 1859?
No, a lot of them just jumped right in.
Okay, make sure you see that, because what you will see, depicted in 1854, gardens right here. So at least for 155 years, the gardens were here. And these were known as an American colonial front garden, which was all your vegetables, your lettuce, all that stuff for your house, your herbs. Currently, this Mrs. Pitney has put a cutting garden in here. So, of course, you're seeing it probably as it's going to bed for the winter, but there's still some blooming. So we're going to walk through, take a look at what's here, give the township some ideas. What would you like to see happen? Would you like to see a committee? Would you like to be on a committee? Do you have some knowledge that you can impart? Let them know.
So what you're saying, no decision's been made as to what will...
No, the only thing that is in perpetuity is that this part of the property has to remain in its natural state. No development can occur here. But no, there has not been a final decision. In the next, I'd say 12 to 18 months, the Township Committee is going to work through a process with the community that hopefully will lead to a transition plan for the property. I think we would definitely like to see members of the community be part of that plan, as well as what we'd hope would be a public-private partnership that ultimately could involve some form of endowment to be raised that would help hold the cost of any ongoing maintenance. We do not see this property as being a property that the town, through tax dollars, would maintain, or through its public works department maintain. It is a specific use. It is one that is going to require something unique, and many other communities have established similar types of public-private partnerships, and we hope to do something similar here to keep up the property. But like I said, until that time, we're very happy that we've been able to work out an agreement with the family where they right now are maintaining the property and keeping it lived in and free of either breakdown or vandalism, which of course we don't want to see either. One of the things I'll mention...
So next spring they will be maintaining this garden?
Yeah, this will continue at least through the foreseeable future, but we've got an agreement with the family, so they would maintain it until we're ready to take on.
Would it be open for traffic?
What we'll do until the time in which we are really in a position to manage the public traffic, it'll be kind of by appointment only. Ultimately we hope to open it up as a real public place, but obviously that has to be done with considerations for safety and security. So we will definitely transition to that. One thing I'll mention before June jumps into some other information is Mrs. Pitney herself, as was mentioned, was an avid garden enthusiast and has a tremendous reputation in the garden community nationally. These gardens, as Eric mentioned, are registered with the Smithsonian, but what she would do is create miniatures using the flowers from the gardens, and those displays would be entered into contests at the garden shows such as the Philadelphia Garden Show, and she's won a number of first prizes in national shows like that for her miniatures. And I think there are some photos of those miniatures in the house, so I encourage you to take a look at that as we end the tour, because it's really an interesting side story on the property.
Okay, so you'll see on your right, rose gardens, left cutting gardens, grape arbors. Okay, here we come to something very interesting. When Duncan Pitney passed away, of course the taxes on this property were quite large. Mrs. Pitney thought that if she planted a tree farm here, she could get farmland assessment. She was unaware that it took at least 3 years to get that assessment. At the end of that time is when the town and Eric and Mrs. Pitney started negotiating for the purchase of this, so her tree farm really has never come to fruition. This is probably an area where you could give the town an idea. Should these trees stay? Should they go? They weren't really original. They're only maybe 5 years along. Does it disrupt the lawn? Do you like it? What, give the town some ideas of what to do. We're going to head up this way.
June, are there any of the existing peach trees?
I don't think so. I read in some of the brochures that a lot of that was all plowed under for other, became a dairy farm, I think, at the very end.
None of these are.
Did you ask about peach trees?
So,
Yeah.
They have a life of maybe 10 or 15 years.
Oh,
max.
I see. Especially in this climate, I guess, maybe.
Apple tree.
That's what did Eric talk about? There were apple trees, and there was Applejack, and a still on here, and there's all sorts of information about that, and that the apple crop wasn't as good as he thought a couple years, and there's some really very interesting ones. Again, you're in the preserved space, all the way out to Cold Hill. This is the original Sugar Maple Alley, original entrance. Should this be the original entrance? Should it be brought back? Do you like coming in this other side? Think about it.
Yeah.
Should these little miniature trees stay? Should they go? We're going to head down toward Mrs. Pitney's greenhouse and her vegetable garden.
The little trees are not going to thrive under these maples.
That's what I'm told, sugar maples. They're about 200 years old. So this is, way back in the very early Pitney history.
So they're actually
Real, you can see it's reminiscent of the South. You see Gone with the Wind. They come up to, 12 Oaks?
Yeah.
12 Oaks, LA.
right in front of the house.
This is the northern version.
Yes, these were planted the same time as those, which get more sun, and so they're not likely to thrive under the maples, I shouldn't think.
I'd love to be able to see this from the road.
You really,
You know, to be able to point out to company that, you know, and see this beautiful. 17. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, I imagine at some point, you know, when Mrs. Pitney leaves the property, that, you know, it will be generally a park and open to the public, and you could bring your company in, you know, because we all do
For
own it.
Easter or
It is
whatever,
ours.
everything blooming.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the beginning of the you just mentioned when Mrs. Pitney. I thought she passed away. No, she's in her 90s. She did break her ankle last weekend, but
Oh, bless her
I
heart.
had
I
a
hope
chat
she
with
wasn't
her.
teeny and getting ready.
No, I mean, it gives us time to plan. It gives her time to live out her life here. You know, I think
Well,
that's
she
what
should.
should be done.
She should.
And so this is Mrs. Pitney's greenhouse. The vegetable garden was moved down here in her time period. Again, she had a lot of people come in from New York City, high-profile people who, you know, this was the real country and farming. And their dinner guests would come down and pick vegetables. They took great delight in bringing them up to the chef and, you know, having picked their salad for dinner and their vegetables.
Yes.
So again, we have a greenhouse that the town owns. We have vegetable garden area. You know, what should be done? Do we need a community garden? Think, you know, and let everyone know. In the 1930s, Roberta Ballantyne of the Ballantyne Brewery, and of course more money than the Pitneys had, because they were mostly subsistence farmers. They weren't wealthy people. Married into the family, and she built this wall garden, which is where we're going to go next.
May we look quickly here?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead. Take a look.
We can go right in?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. It's yours. Go in. They probably don't like me saying it. I spoke with her last week. We had come to do a little, you know, gathering of all the docents. And she was going back to see Tri-County Orthopedics because where she broke her ankle, it was bothering her. But she was on the township committee. I think may have been one of the first women ever on the township committee. Her father ran for governor. Her maiden name was Troust, T-R-O-A-S-T. He built either the Parkway or the Turnpike. He was quite a big wig, and you know, she came from a big political family. She said Duncan wasn't happy when she was on the committee, you know, because people would call, and you know, he liked to live a more quiet kind of a life. Not at this point, but I'm assuming, you know, people who are interested, maybe we can do that. We can get, you know, a group that are interested in helping maintain.
Collectively, it's humongous, but in small parts.
What we were thinking.
Eric has said a lot of parties happen in here, cocktail parties for his sister's wedding. All the sisters got married at this gazebo out here, which is also Miss Ballantyne Pitney's creation. In the center, there's a fountain. Eric said last time it was turned on, it worked. And the remnants of that fountain came from the mansion in Morristown. So they brought that out here.
Is the mansion in Morristown still standing?
I think
or
it
has
was
been
knocked down for office buildings or something in that 70, you know, wasn't
like a
it?
lot of others?
It's in that area, though, there are still some standing mansions, but I think that one came down.
Gosh, you was such a good brain, and such a wonderful skill.
Oh, he's not. He's not. Well, figure out what this whole thing says.
Oh, is it?
There's pieces. We might not be able to. No, because
Isn't that
it was
charming?
at least
So
2 years,
sweet.
and then they said, you know, they came to the town and said, you know, we'd like to preserve it. We don't want to develop it and knock everything down. So again, here is the gazebo where everyone's married. It needs some work. Maybe we can find a roofer in town who can. They said a Phoenician, or it's an old god. He's got some kind of growth on his face. Supposedly a famous guy, but Eric forgot who it was, and he and he never got back to me. Yes, we're going to have to knock on her bedroom door and ask her who he is. But as you head this way, and you're looking at the house, She has a new, well, relative to the new Mrs. Pitney, this is her St. Francis garden. You'll see the statue in the middle and plantings around. The addition to the left is a double piano room. It's a huge room that I see for meetings, but that's my personal, garden club, women's club, that kind of thing. But, really huge, beautiful room that's been added in the back. And then Steve's going to take you on over toward the barn.
Thank you, June.
Thank
Okay.
you so much.
All right.
Thank you,
Great.
June.
Okay.
I'm just going to walk over, take a quick peek at the St. Francis garden, and then head towards the barns. This is the St. Francis garden here to my right. Small little garden outside of the screened-in porch. This room here, one day we'll definitely open up the house when it makes sense to see that as well. But the room that we're looking at actually is an addition in the, I believe it was late 20s, early 30s, but it became the music room. Mr. Pitney was an avid pianist, and they have dueling grand pianos in there. Many a night entertaining. This room also contains a lot of the letters and the family history that Eric is so graciously moved to the front of the front of the house that you'll look at when you come back. But I remember my first time coming here, and on the wall there's letters going back to sitting presidents dating as far back as Lincoln. On the wall, one that stands out was there was a letter. I think he's moved it to the front that you'll see from William Howard Taft, when he was sitting president, to A. Pitney, apologizing to them for not being courteous enough to come to the other side of a railway station in New Haven, where this individual's daughter was waiting for a train, and he didn't want to appear discourteous, and was writing to apologize that if she saw me, I apologize for not coming across. I mean, it's really a great window on in terms of how much more intimate national politics was from today, but and also how much more common courtesy, I think, was in place back generations ago. We're going to walk to the back. There's a well-fed pool that I just wanted to show everyone, and then we're going to go over and look at the barn.
So the house is staying?
The house is staying in some fashion. A lot will depend on what the community decides to do.
Well, I mean, it's probably a disaster on the side.
There are certain things that will have to be either removed or repaired.
In whatever preliminary form the plans are for this property, where would new buildings go?
Again, that would be somebody.
You haven't.
We haven't gone now. There
yet?
hasn't been any. What we are doing now, the one thing I can
thought
tell
some
you,
study had been done.
we are in the process of hiring process for a structural engineer who will be coming in and looking at all the facilities, evaluating their strengths and weaknesses, as well as helping us with the next phase of what we hope will be the community process. By that time, we will have a full evaluation of the buildings, a sense of where, if there was to be either adaptive reuse or new construction, where it would make sense. And ideally, what we hope is from their study to an intermediate step where we can really kind of fine-tune what the community feels is the best focal point for the property, to get to that point working with the community, and then bring back the professionals working with a group that's made up of community members as well as neighborhood representatives to design whatever that focal point may be. One of the things we'd like to do in the next 12 to 18 months is eliminate all of the varied options that you've probably heard and focus on what is the community's desired option. And rather than having to deflect concerns about 16 things, talk about one thing that makes sense with a plan for the grounds and a plan for the upkeep of the facilities, and really work with the community to both develop consensus for that plan, but also how that plan would be implemented. But it's a step process, and somebody mentioned, I think it was Sandy, you know, my job got infinitely more complex than it has. But this is an exciting...
That was me.
Yes.
Or was it you? I'm sorry, I couldn't remember who said it.
Or maybe you heard it a couple
times.
George.
But you know, this is an exciting complexity. I mean, obviously, walking around, you can really get a sense of why the township was excited with the prospect of being able to acquire the property. It was more than the typical open space acquisition that we've been involved in the past that just involved a natural area. It had the potential to be something more than that. What that more would be has not been determined, and hopefully the community will work with us to get there. But it's going to take some time, and that's why we're happy that the Pitney family is working with us. We, I feel, are getting as much out of what they're doing as they're getting out of the ability to allow Mrs. Pitney to stay in a place that she's known and loved. You know, for example, a boiler went on one of the buildings. The family is replacing that boiler. I mean, it's not just cutting the grass, it's physical upgrades as well. They understand that there is a quid pro quo in return for being allowed to stay on a property that you've just taken a substantial amount of money for its acquisition, and it's really a transition plan that, you know, right now they're working with us and we're working with them, and hopefully it will ease into what will be a great community place that everybody can feel very proud of someday down the road.
How long is she entitled to stay?
That is totally within our discretion. Basically at the end of the year, we have agreed to give a reasonable notice, 3 months notice at any point. The only firm commitment was through the end of the year. I will tell you, given that we are almost at the end of the year and we know we have at least a 12 to 18 month planning process in front of us, and we're really not ready to take it on yet, that we're going to look to roll it over, and I think the family will gladly accept that.
How old is she?
She's 89 years old.
Oh, well.
She's in good shape. She did have a fall.
You can't really put her out.
No, and you know, and she. But to be fair, the family was willing. If we had said as part of the acquisition, you know, this is the time,
right,
they were ready for that. But you know, like I said, the reality is we're actually not ready for her to move yet, because you can imagine what a burden this would be. We just wouldn't be able to take it on just yet.
Right.
So,
I mean, everything should probably be preserved, but it could turn into another Glen Alpin like in Harding.
Yeah, we very much don't want that to happen. One of the things you'll hear me reference a little later in the tour is when I introduce the members from the Historic Preservation Committee. What we'd love to see happen is something similar to the success story we've had with the cider mill, which also could have easily turned into another Glen Alpin. The town bought that land with open space. A nonprofit group rose up, spearheaded by Ray Nadaske, who some of you may know. They raised the funds to first just get the general upkeep and then actually build it into an interpretive center, and they now operate it on a long-term lease from the town. Now that was a simple, single-purpose property, small, but the concept still works, and I think that if we can work with the community first to establish what the goal is going to be, and then establish a process on which we can reach that goal, hopefully not having to dwell on tax dollars, but on private contribution, as well as some creative things that we can do with this property to spin off revenue to support its upkeep. I think that's the way we envision this happening. But it's going to take, like I said, probably 12 to 18 months of hard analysis and community input to get there. I'm going to keep us moving because the other tour is going to probably clip our heels. Back here, just really quickly, I'm going to shorten this part of the tour because there's not a lot to say, is a well-fed pool. And I guess you just take a quick peek and then we're going to walk quickly over to the barn.
And we're still on untouchable property. This can't.
Yep, this is all still part of the buffer. You can see that if you look under the great, you see that little pink marker. If you look all the way down.
Oh yes.
That if you envision a straight line kind of running from there to that marker there, that's the corner of the U, the back side of the U, if you remember.
Right.
Okay. So everything that touches up against this is Shelton, Cold Hill, and most of Ballantyne is buffer. This is the well-fed pool. Unfortunately, it's drained right now, so you don't get a feel for how pretty it looked. Oh, good. And we had talked about, I mean, again, all of these are speculative and subject to further discussion, but maybe someday, this being kind of just a reflecting pool, it is obviously way too small to be anything, you know, in terms of a recreational facility, but something more decorative is certainly a possibility. Maybe not as deep, you know, we would have to look at the, you know, the safety and those types of things, but when you see this, hopefully at another time filled, you know, it's just basically picture the water level, very clear, right up to the edge, and it almost looks like a reflecting pool. We're going to keep walking as we talk down to the barn. Feel free to ask questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When Mrs. Pitney does move,
Yes.
is the house totally taken?
Just as people are, we had a question here. Careful on the walk. Yeah, I slipped earlier. It's very slippery. Somebody had asked the question, and I had mentioned it in one of the earlier tours, about the interior contents of the house and some of the documents and things, the historic relics. The family has indicated if it isn't already bequeathed, and some of it has been, to family members, their intent is to turn it over to the town, whether it be furnishings, paintings, letters, documents, all of the documents that are now with the Newark Museum. Eric is working to get back to the town. So the hope is, you know, no matter what this ultimately becomes, that there could be an area that would be dedicated to the history of the property and all of that information, some of that furnishings, some of the things that really make the interior part of the property special could remain here. So that's something that they're working with us on, and was not part of the agreement, but they want to see happen. Okay, we're going to go into the barn. That's the last station of the tour. Before you, or as I'm introducing Tim Timpson, take a peek. There's a little a book here with a picture of the farm back in its day as a farm. It really gives you an appreciation of its both breadth and look. Tim Timpson is a member of our Historic Preservation Committee, and he has graciously agreed to give you a little background on the barn and the farm history, or it's the way the barn and the history ties together with farming. One other thing I will mention, I mentioned it with his counterpart from the morning tours, and Tim is equally involved in it. If you haven't been to the cider mill over on Ralston Cider Mill on Route 24, they've closed off for the fall their tours, but will be, I guess, restarting in the spring. Tim is very involved with that, and I know does tours. That property has been fully restored. The house has been also restored to become an interpretive center, and if you haven't done that tour, when you see the signs go up for the spring, or if they have a website as well, I encourage you to do it. It's really remarkable what a group of volunteers have been able to do, working with foundation money and contributions and just sweat equity to take something that was really about as in disrepair as you could get and bring it back to a working relic. But today's not about the cider mill. I just wanted to give that a little plug.
Oh, no, keep going.
But Tim, again, is going to take us through a little bit of history on the barn.
Okay. How many of you were brought up in a farm? No one.
The percentages have gone down.
I can say anything then. All right, one of the most interesting things, I was wondering, how do you make a barn interesting for 5 minutes? And I figure the most important thing is this barn now belongs to us. And the question is, if you have any recommendations, what can we do with it? It would be a nice thought. This is a 3-story barn, and every 3-story barn I've been in has the same function. The ground floor, the one below us, is where they kept what?
Livestock.
Livestock, absolutely right. This floor, why don't you take a look over here. What do you suppose they did on this floor?
Equipment.
Stored equipment, right. And the third floor,
Hay.
absolutely, there it is.
You're all done.
Okay, and this was the most important building, farm building. And as such, it's an enigma to us because we're told it was rebuilt in the 1970s. If you look in the corner over here, you'll see pegs. You see pegs over there. Up here, if you look at some of these rafters, the bark is still there. That's quite a bit older. Look at the planking on the sides of the barn. See it over there? And compare it to that. This is called girt construction because that's a horizontal bar going between the two posts. No girts. Our feeling is there may have been a fire here. They say the barn had to be rebuilt because of the fire. Fire may have been from that side. And that's the part they repaired or rebuilt. The rest of it looks considerably older, not real old, not fantastically old. If you look carefully again at
Because these have all
the
saw marks on them.
You see the saw marks
Yeah.
on the face of this beam, or over on the face of that beam?
Yeah.
All right, that tells us this was built sometime after 1835. That's when circular saws came to the United States in 1835. The nails, I found some nails, they're cut nails, that means it was built sometime after 1870. Also, if you take a look at these spacers, they use 3 nails. Nobody, back in the time when nails were being handmade, would ever think of using 3 nails. In a piece like that, there wouldn't be any nails. So trying to date this is difficult. I would say, just taking a guess, I would say most of this was probably turn of the 20th century, between the 19th and 20th century, with later additions, probably where the fire took place. Now, you've got hay on the 3rd floor, we've got...
Were they still doing pegs and mortars then? I guess you're saying they were, huh?
I asked an architect, he said, no, they weren't. That's why this is an enigma.
I would have thought they weren't too.
Yeah, that's an enigma. Of course, if you go to Pennsylvania, Dutch County, you'll find a lot of hay.
Oh,
but
yeah, oh, sure.
That's different. And we do have a Pennsylvania Dutch barn that was just built about 5 years ago on Mountain Avenue, and that's pegged. So,
Could be.
I don't know. It's difficult to date this. The hay on the 3rd floor, how did we get it to the animals on the 1st floor? See over there, there's a chute. And they just, with a fork, I'm going to say shovel it in. What they were shoveling is more downstairs than upstairs. With a pitchfork, they throw it in there and just go down to the 3rd floor. If we go into this area,
I'll take you over. If you don't, if you're confused, I'll take you over.
just a little while ago, we had Lawrence Paco came through, or Paco had a milk farm, dairy, on the north side of Main Street, Brookside. And she had a job, when the hay came in, her job was to spread it around this floor. And when they spread it, they were spreading it the height of these beams. So she had a lot of work to do. The hay, the straw or hay came through that door. If you look along the ridgepole, you'll see that there's a track, metal track. And that thing would bring the hay over on that track, and then drop it where they wanted, and she would spread it. These doors over here, can't see it as a door, maybe if you look. Right above me. All of this is a door that would open up when the hay wagons came. And this door would slide down. It didn't swing out the way most doors do. It would slide down. And then they'd hook up a team of horses when they wanted to close it. And they would pull it back up to this position here.
What were these metal bars, you know?
Yeah, you can see the trail there. If you have good eyes, you can see it going across the level. Now, this was a dairy farm. At one time it was vegetables. They did grow grass here. When you leave here, you're going to be driving down a road that they called Wood Road or Woods Road. It's not on any map, this is just what the Pitney family called it. Now, Woods Road would be a road that goes through the woods, stays in the woods, and doesn't seem to go anyplace. But this was a farm, it had to get its produce out, and just to the north of us ran the Rockaway Valley Railroad. And this would be the perfect place, I'm assuming now that the road was to take their produce from the farm out to the train, load it on the train, and then ship it west to Morristown, to Elizabeth, to the Oranges, and Newark, where the bigger markets were. That, I think, is the source of Wood Road.
Wasn't there a Pitney stop on the railroad?
There was a Pitney stop, and if you walk down Patriots Path follows the old Rockaway Valley Railroad, which is called the Rockaway, Rockaway Baby.
A lot of names.
The Rockaway, to me, is still the Rockaway Valley Railroad. Patriots Path follows that right of way. And if you get on it right here by Cold Hill Road, walking toward Brookside, first thing you do is look to your left and you'll see a big metal tank that is bolted together, not welded. So we know it's before 1917, I think, is when they started welding. Just down from that, you'll find some concrete pylons, and this is where they would dump coal. So Pitney Station, or Pitney Stop, was more of a commercial place where they could drop their coal for families around here, and also where they could pick up produce from the farms and take it east to the bigger markets. Pitneys, you know, were one of the first families here. If you read the history of MENDHAM written by Cecil Davis, he wrote this in about 1920, he said that in 1740, the only signs of human habitation between MENDHAM town and Morristown was Drake's Clearing, which is across the street, what is it now? 2040?
510 now.
510 now. Across 510. Drake's Clearing, right? Pitney Farm, the Axtell Farm, and Jesse Smith's Mill, right? So this was very much a farming community. If you saw that picture downstairs of the farm, and the noticeable thing is the absence of trees. This whole area was just clear cut. And if you talk to some of our older residents, and if any of you know Ray Woodhull, okay, Ray has lived here. He is now, I think, 84 years old. And he remembers standing on Cold Hill Road, and he could see perfectly clearly over to Sunrise Lake. Everything had been cut.
Are these silos here?
Yes, those are silos. Those were grain houses, and I believe this was an ice house at one point. It's now a residence. This is where the animals were kept. Actually, more specifically the cows.
Wow.
Wait till we have everybody. I apologize. I probably won't do as good a job as Tim, but I'll give you a little idea. As you can see, these are the stalls that the cows would be put into. There would be feed in front of them, so they would be able to eat, and they'd be kind of collared in and milked. By the time they were using this as a cow operation, it was a modern cow operation, so they were not hand milking these. It was more of an automated system. The milk would be taken out and delivered east, just as Tim was saying, with some of the other produce to the more urban markets. One funny story Eric was telling us was that, you know, when they converted the driveway from the short driveway that we saw that was tree lined to the longer driveway that went out to Route 510. One of the practical considerations they didn't think of was that in the wintertime, when the snow just became too difficult to plow, that they oftentimes would be unable to get the milk out to the roadway, and they'd have to dump it because it just would spoil. But you know, again, you get a real feel for how this operation worked, and actually behind that door there goes out to a feed pen for some of the other livestock, and that was basically the use of this portion of the barn. That's really it. I encourage everybody, as I said, that didn't get a chance before we started to go back to the house and take a look at some of the photographs and letters and things like that, as well as the video which shows the property in a springtime bloom. And if you have any other questions, feel free to grab us or at the welcome tent we have a place. If there were any questions we couldn't answer, you can jot them down and we'll try and get back to you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all very much.
The sled,
If
very.
anybody's never been in a cow barn, cow puts their head in through here and this gets closed on him, he stands here
Yep.
all day long.
Would this have been done by hand?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Well, he said no, but
Oh, you
I
think it might
think
have
so.
been? Oh, okay. How many